You just sing Hare Krishna?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Krishna,
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna,
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna,
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama,
Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This is hard tune for people to follow. Okay, let me sing a simpler one. When the beat is not going right for. Okay. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. I'm trying to sing the simple one which everybody can follow nicely. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama,
Kartal like this for this space. You can show it and then maybe you can try. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Anyway, to practice it will come. Idea is not to convert you all into musicians. You can start?
Yes, Prabhuji, we can start.
I don't think expecting any more people, right?
People will come. 15 to 16 people.
Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari, 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 Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari, Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari, Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari, Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari, Yashodanandana 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 Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira
तीरा बनचारी
यमुना तीरा बनचारी
यमुना तीरा बनचारी
राधा माधव जय बिहारी
जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी
We'll start.
Yes, Prabhuji. We'll start with the handouts or this?
Whatever you like.
Yeah, whatever. Okay.
With the boss.
No, I think that is fine.
Whatever you like.
With the Bhagavatam.
Okay. Want to start straight with Bhagavatam?
Yes.
Or maybe at least give lip service to the first part that you printed?
Yes.
Or you want to just use it next time?
We can use next time. It's not a problem.
Maybe I can just read this and then connect it. It's also fine.
Okay, Prabhuji.
I need some place to keep the Bhagavatam.
Okay.
That's perfect.
Mama can give. Let all the kids go. Okay? Next, sit here. और चाहिए? Yeah. कुछ नहीं हो रहा है.
Thank you all for coming. We're reading from nice notes that Devendra has created, so we'll read from there. Sri Namamrita, the nectar of the holy name. So the topic is in Kali Yuga, or the current age that we're in, the constant singing of the holy name is more effective than the yoga system for controlling the mind. The mind is chanchala, which means flickering, and it changes very strongly. Therefore, Arjun admitted that controlling the mind is not at all possible. This would be as difficult as controlling the wind. For example, if one were in a boat moving according to the wind on the river or the sea, and the wind were uncontrolled, the tilting boat would be very much disturbed and extremely difficult to control. It might even capsize. Therefore, the Bhava Samudra, or the ocean of mental speculation and transmigration to different types of bodies, one must first control the mind. By regular practice, one can control the mind, and this is the purpose of yoga system. But there's a chance of failure with the yoga system, especially in the age of Kali, because the yoga system uses artificial means. If the mind is engaged in Bhakti Yoga, however, by the grace of Krishna, one can easily control it. Therefore, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has recommended Hare Nam, Hare Nam, Hare Nam Eva Kevalam, which means that the holy name, the holy name, the holy name, and nothing else other than the holy name. One should chant the holy name of the Lord constantly, for the holy name of the Lord is non-different from Hari, the Supreme Person. By chanting the Hare Krishna mantra constantly, one can fix the mind on the lotus feet of Krishna, Savaya Mana Krishna Padara Dandayo, which means that your mind is fixed on the feet of Krishna. And in this way, achieve the perfection of yoga. Otherwise, the flickering mind will hover on the platform of mental speculation for sense enjoyment, and one will have to transmigrate from one type of body to another. And today also happens to be the festival of Shivaratri, which is the appearance of Lord Shiva, and the picture of Lord Shiva next to Krishna. So, Devendra Prabhu suggested that I could maybe speak about Shivaratri a little bit and explain what the context of Shivaratri is. And also we'll connect it with the verse. And the way I like to have these discussions is to have them to be fairly interactive as opposed to a lecture format where I will speak for an hour and then people may or may not listen, and then not sure what anybody gets out of it, but I'd like to keep it very interactive so that you feel inclined and feel encouraged to ask questions that occur to you as we discuss the topic, or any other questions that might be relevant that is going to help you with your individual spiritual practice. So there are questions of many types. Questions which are just out of curiosity. We have questions which we want to get answers for. The questions that are specifically related to our own personal spiritual practice and how we want to expand it and so on. So there might be questions which you feel comfortable discussing in a group. Some questions which you may not feel comfortable discussing in a group. So if you want to even discuss later on, that's also fine. But in a class format like we have in our regular Friday congregation, it's very difficult to ask questions because there are so many more people and time is also limited. But in a more intimate setting of a home, then the whole idea is that to allow people who come who are spiritual seekers the opportunity to ask questions that they might otherwise not be able to ask. So does that seem okay? Does that seem like a format we can follow? Okay. So the text that we read talks about what is the effective process. This is where I said there was a typo, holy name.
Okay.
I said the holy name.
Okay.
So is more effective than yoga system for controlling the mind. So before we get into this question, I think the first question that is out there is, what is the need to even control the mind? If someone says, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to talk about the various techniques of controlling the mind and which technique is better, then the first question is, what is the need for even controlling the mind? So does anybody have that question?
Is it like controlling the mind is like same to controlling your indriya? I would say.
Can you explain that?
You know, like
Question.
people say, can you control your indriya or like
Senses.
senses and have some control on them.
Okay, so controlling your senses, but who controls your senses? Is it your... See, what are your senses? Explain to me your senses. What are the senses?
When like the mind.
Mind is not a sense.
Oh, no, mind.
Okay. So like touch,
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah.
right? Sight, hearing, smell. These are your... Typically you talk about 5 senses, right? The sense of hearing, the sense of smell, the sense of sight, the sense of touch, and smell. 5 senses you talk about. So are these senses able to do things without direction of the mind? Usually not. I mean, some senses have less control. For instance, smell, right? Your mind may not necessarily control directly what you smell, because if a good or bad smell comes in the air, then you pretty much are forced to smell it. It's not like your mind is forcing you to smell it. But then, again, you have some opportunity that the mind, if not directly, indirectly controls your senses. So, for control of senses to be possible, control of mind is required. Because without control of mind, control of senses is not possible. If your mind is uncontrolled, the senses follow the direction of the mind. And does anybody disagree with that statement? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So if you're... So again, it begs the same question. Regardless of whether you talk about senses or mind, the question remains the same. What does it need to control your mind? Or what does it need to control your senses?
To have proper concentration
For what?
for anything, whatever we do, like praying, studying, whatever.
Okay. And do you have a perspective on this?
I've been taught the ultimate goal is samadhi, to reach that higher state, be one
Right.
with God.
But at a more practical level also, as in your personal experience, I mean, controlling the mind, is it something that is worth aspiring for?
Yeah.
Otherwise it will go in all directions, like we are not
Yeah.
focused.
So when we talk about freedom, what is the meaning of freedom? Yes. Okay, so you raised your hand, but you don't have an answer. That's fine. Anybody else? Yes. Yeah, so it's free. Okay, so be free. But what does that mean? Yes. Hmm? Okay, that's 2 strikes now.
Like usually we think like freedom means
That you are not under anybody's control.
controls, do whatever you want.
Yeah, you can.
know.
You have freedom to do. But then, if you're under the control of your mind and your mind is pushing you one way or the other, then are you really free? Right? That's the question. So when people say freedom, happiness, and so on and so forth, so which means that you're not under the direction, you're not slave to the dictates of your mind, and that's what. So as you were saying, like anything that's worth doing, be it spiritual activity or be it even like material things or even work, unless you can concentrate, you cannot execute it correctly. And if your mind is all over the place, then the mind cannot control it. So I think it's clear, even from a practical perspective, that controlling the mind is a prerequisite for anything that's worth doing. Because if you can't put your mind to it and focus on it, then it's not going to get done.
Right.
Be it, whether you want to finish an assignment or whether you want to finish your homework or even, and if you're a surgeon, if you're doing a surgery, you got to put your mind to it. If you're all over the place, you might cut the wrong cord or something like that, and it might be an issue. So those kind of things. So controlling the mind is critical. Now, what the premise that's put here is that, and this is a premise, so let's see how we can understand that premise, is that constant chanting of the holy name is more effective than the yoga system for controlling the mind. So, the reason, when we talk about controlling the mind, and Wendy brought up a very interesting term called samadhi. What is the meaning of that word samadhi? Does anybody know? I mean, it's a term that we use fairly commonly in at least the devotee lingo, but what does it actually mean?
Go for moksha. To get the moksha.
Okay, so that's another curveball term that we use now. So what is that now? What is the meaning of moksha?
So doing kind of tapasya.
Pardon me?
Like doing tapasya, you try to connect with the God.
Okay, connecting with God. Okay, that's one answer. Tapasya or austerity is a process. So process and the destination are different. Right? So the process is austerity and different kinds of austerity, and austerity has different objectives also. People might be doing austerity for something fairly mundane. Like, if someone wants to win the Olympic gold medal in a certain event, a lot of austerity involved in ensuring that you practice to a point where you're the expert in that area and you win that gold medal. A lot of austerity involved. You cannot eat whatever you want. You cannot sleep whenever you want. You have to practice, and you have to. A lot of austerity involved. So nobody can claim that an Olympic gymnast is not performing austerity, correct? I mean, they cannot eat whatever they want. What does austerity mean? Austerity means that you're denying yourself things that you are inclined to do for a higher purpose. So you have a higher purpose in mind, because of which things that necessarily people want to do, you're denying yourself so that you can focus on the higher purpose. So austerity by itself is not a spiritual activity. Unless the goal is spiritual, the austerity by itself doesn't become spiritual. You see what I'm saying? So if your goal is something fairly mundane and you're doing austerity for that purpose, right? So like, at least in some countries, especially in India, it's very common for politicians to go on hunger strike for various topics or various things, for fairly mundane, routine things. They'll go on a hunger strike until their demands are met, and so on and so forth. That kind of austerity is really not spiritually beneficial. It's just basically it's a weapon. Like sometimes even kids use that weapon, right? I'm not going to eat until I get to watch the movie or whatever, right? So they're taking on some austerity to achieve some goals. So austerity by itself is not spiritual. There are many examples of that in our scripture also. But unless the goal is spiritual, the austerity by itself doesn't become spiritual. So I want to make sure we understand the distinction. So we cannot just feel that just because we're following an austere process, and if our goal is not clear, our goal is not spiritual, then our activity itself is not spiritual. Does that make sense? So anyway, some of these terms are, reason I kind of ask these questions, not to put people on the spot, but the idea is to bring out the fact that some of these terms that we use quite often may not be totally clear to when we use them, what exactly it means and how, in what context we're using them. So,
what is the yoga system here? Like why yoga system is compared?
Yeah, so the yoga system that's compared here is the yoga system that's described in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the Ashtanga yoga system. Have you heard of the word Ashtanga yoga? Ashta means 8, and Anga means limbs or parts. So Ashtanga means the 8-part yoga system. That's typical. That's just what it means. So it's nothing beyond that. It just means 8-part yoga system. So the next question is, what are the 8 parts of the yoga system, and what are the 8 parts? So the yoga system that the Patanjali yoga, which is commonly known as Hatha yoga, all these is like got 8 parts. The first 2 parts are yam and niyam. Yam is prescriptions, and niyam is prohibitions or regulations. So there are certain rules or regulations that one has to follow.
Other way around, please.
Yeah. Niyam is.
Yeah.
Pardon me? Niyam is
like discipline.
Discipline.
Yeah. So some prescriptions.
Right.
And yam is the prohibitions.
The prohibitions.
Yeah.
So yam and niyam are the first 2 things that we have to follow. Thank you, bro. So the first 2 things are yam and niyam, followed by asana. And asana is your bodily postures that you have to practice for, and that's what commonly known as yoga. People understand yoga to be bodily postures. So when you talk about someone says, I'm practicing yoga, or I'm a yoga studio, the common understanding is you're basically doing the bodily postures that help improve your back or your posture, or maintain better health. And that's only one of the 8 limbs of yoga. And again, the yogis practice that particular aspect of yoga so that they would have a fit and strong body, so that they could then practice the real purpose of yoga, which is, again, to connect with God. So if God is nowhere in the picture, then it's not really yoga in the first place. And then you have something called pranayam. Pranayam is the breathing techniques, which are taught systematically to get equilibrium in your breath. And it's highly technical, highly scientific, which I really have no understanding of. So I'm not a asana specialist. And so these are the first 4. So the problem is most people are not interested in doing yam and niyam. So they want to pretty much live their life however they want to live, and then they want to get into asana. So you're basically already getting into the asana stage without any prerequisites in terms of how you live your life. So one of the requirements of practicing yoga system is, and if I start saying that, people start, like, one is celibacy. The complete celibacy is required for actually practicing yoga system the way it is designed. And most people are, in this day and age, are not. Huh?
It's a precondition.
It's a precondition, actually. So again, so people conveniently forget all the preconditions, and there's a reason for that, because ultimately there's an objective for it, and so on and so forth. So then a certain specific way of diet, of rules and regulations, and how you live your life, and so on and so forth. Then you get to the asana stage. Then you get to the pranayam stage, right? And then there's pratyahara right after that. Pratyahara means you start giving up things that are undesirable and start becoming more spiritually focused. Because what ends up happening is, as you practice the yoga system, the 8-fold yoga system, then you start achieving what's called yogic siddhis, or yogic powers that make you a lot more powerful. You have power to control your mind to a level where you can maybe move objects, or all those kind of things which are seen as magic for the common man who doesn't know the technique. Is the kind of siddhis that you will acquire, which again is not the objective of the yoga system. This is a byproduct that actually, if you look at it from the real perspective, is more of a distraction. So a person who's focused on the goal of getting love of God and connection with God, for him achieving powers is more of a distraction. To give you an example, from a mundane perspective, if you become president of the United States, you get to live in the White House and you get to fly Air Force One. But the objective of becoming president is not to fly on Air Force One and live in the White House. So somebody asks, why do you want to be president? I want to be president so that I can fly in the Air Force One, and that's going to be so cool. And the guy's not going to get elected because that's not going to make any sense to most people. Saying that's a byproduct. Okay, if you're president, you get to fly. That's fine, but that cannot be the goal of wanting to be president. The only reason I want to be president is because I can get to fly on Air Force One. I doubt you're going to be very successful if that's your mission. So similarly, if you practice yoga system, you will get some powers.
It's like privilege.
Like a privilege, right? But it's not the objective of practicing yoga system. So a true yogi doesn't practice yoga system so that he can get those powers that he can typically misuse. So a lot of people who end up practicing yoga system without the proper grounding and proper objective and understanding, they end up getting these siddhis and get totally waylaid. And then that becomes the focus, and then they become very powerful and famous because they have powers that other people don't have.
You can get ash in their hand.
Yeah, they can get ash in their hand, they can create gold out of their hand, and all these things become fascinating to people, and that becomes, oh, they're God. Well, I can take a huge bundle of hay in the backyard and burn it and make huge amount of ash, right? So making ash is not a sign of God, so it's just a process that you know, right? Another example that I was taught about is that if you have never lifted free weights in your life, right? And you see a guy lifting 300 pounds, you might say, wow, this guy's like amazing. This guy's like Superman. No, maybe he was just as thin as you like 20 years ago and he's constantly lifted weight. He didn't start lifting 300 pounds, he started lifting 80 pounds, 100 pounds, slowly over time, built up his strength, now he can lift 300 pounds. So he went through a process step by step and got to a point where he can lift more weight than he can imagine. And for somebody who cannot even lift 50 pounds, he might think, wow, this is total magic. He can lift 300 pounds, inhuman. I can't even move it, and he's lifting it. So I'm just giving you an idea that, it's an extrapolation. You can understand that, how somebody can acquire certain siddhis, which can make him very powerful or her very powerful. So that's, once you get to the pratyahara stage, you start focusing more on the real goal, and all the externals, all the other distractions go away.
Is that the non-attachment?
Pardon me?
Non-attaching.
Yes. And then the next stage it's called dharana. Well, dharana just means, the Sanskrit word just means accepting or capturing. I mean, what other synonyms can you think of?
You're right for the other.
So and what are you capturing? You're capturing.
Being fixed, actually.
Yeah, you're getting fixed.
Yeah.
You're basically capturing the Lord, Paramatma, Krishna in your heart. And then once you get to that stage, then you have dhyana. Dhyana means single-minded attention focused on the Lord. And then samadhi is stage number 8, where you're in the equilibrium stage, where there's nothing else that shakes you from that stage. So in dhyana stage also, you might be going to that platform and coming down. So you might be experiencing that platform off and on of being in that samadhi stage. So in dhyana stage, you might be experiencing the platform of samadhi like maybe a few times a day or whatever. But in samadhi stage, you're basically in that stage. That's your constant position.
But dharan actually means that consciousness is fixed now.
Right.
I'm sorry. Dharan basically means that senses have been withdrawn. Dharan,
right.
Like it means that sense control happens only the dharan stage, not
right.
before that. And once senses are controlled, then comes dhyan, because you cannot do dhyan
right.
unless until your senses are controlled.
So in the Bhagavad Gita, this is defined in 2 terms. So it's called Yoga Ruruksha and Yoga Rudha.
What was yoga?
Yoga Ruruksha is the practitioner of yoga.
Right.
In the 6th chapter it comes. And Yoga Rudha is the perfection stage. So until
we would be like yoga ruksha, sort of like not
yeah,
even that.
Generously you can call ourselves Yoga Rukshas. But so until you get to the dhyana stage of Yoga Ruruksha.
Right, yes. Yeah.
And dhyana and into samadhi is when you're yoga ruda.
Right, yes.
That's how the Gita defines it in the 6th chapter. The first,
Yeah,
I think third, fourth verse describes this yoga ruksha, yoga ruda.
Yeah, that's a
form.
great way of kind of like,
Yeah.
that's,
So this is defined in the, I forget the exact words, I think it's either 3rd or 4th verse in chapter 6. It describes yoga ruksha and yoga ruda. And yoga ruksha means practitioner, yoga ruda is perfectionist. So yoga ruksha, yoga ruda. So yoga ruda means one who's perfect and one's already in the dhyana and samadhi stage, and the yoga, and Krishna explains what are the processes that one has to go through for practicing yoga. And at the end of that whole description, Arjun, who he's speaking to, Arjun's reaction is, Arjun doesn't say, wow, where can I sign up? When do I start? Arjun's reaction is, the system that you've described to me is unendurable and impractical. And he's standing in a battlefield, he has to fight a battle, and he's a fairly accomplished individual, Arjun himself. He's not some guy walking off the street. So he's somebody who's been trained in the proper way in the Varnashrama system. He's a Kshatriya. He's an associate of Krishna. He's been trained in a very proper way in terms of education and etiquette and so on and so forth. So he knows what is yoga. He knows what is proper behavior. His senses are controlled and so on and so forth. So he already has as a grounding which is fairly substantial. So he's not like somebody who just walked off the street and said, I want to be a yogi. He's fairly well trained and has a very systematic upbringing, and is a royal upbringing. It's not like he was born in poverty or anything. He's been in the family of a king and so on. And his reaction is that the system is highly impractical and unendurable. So tell me something which I can actually do. Because, I have to follow this practice for years and years and years. And still, it's like one of those things, right? That I have to practice it over and over again, and any deviation means I'll fall down, and I'll have to start from scratch, start from the beginning again. So I have a process that I start today, and I need to focus single-mindedly for another 30, 40 years, 50 years, even that's a short time, but yoga system might even take longer. And if I practice for 40 years, at the end of the 40th year, if I happen to not be able to practice anymore or fall down, then everything I did is lost. And I got to basically start from scratch again, type of thing. So he says, this is totally impractical. I cannot do this. That's why Krishna says, that's why I told you. I explained this process to you because it's one of the processes that is a valid process for self-realization. It is definitely a valid process. It's definitely an authorized process. But is it practical for our situation is the question. So the question is not whether it is a practical, it's a valid process. It's definitely a valid process. There's no question. Otherwise it would not be in the Bhagavad Gita. It would not be a process that's even practiced by people. But for people, like, forget about us. I want to generalize to the audience or anybody else. But just for myself, you have a job, you have family, you have responsibilities. So how do you become a single-minded yogi aiming for samadhi? So is that a process that I can even practically take on? That I stop everything and just focus on being a yogi for the next 50 years? Is that something I can practically take on? And do I have 50 years even? I don't know. Right? So those are some of the questions that will come, that then you say, okay, then what is the process? What is an easier process that will lead us to the same goal? Right? And so that's what the premise here is, that chanting the Lord's name gives us the same benefit of the yoga system, but it's a lot easier. Now it's easier, but it's not cheap. It's not easy. There's a price to pay. It's not in terms of money or anything of that sort, but in terms of sincerity. Right? So the qualities that we have to acquire are, one is faith. Right? So we have to have faith in something, regardless of what, even a person who's an atheist has got firm faith that his beliefs are valid. You gotta believe in something, right? You gotta have faith in something. You have faith that you're gonna, when you go to bed, you go to sleep at night, right? Go to bed, you have firm faith you're gonna wake up next morning. So you set the alarm because you know that the alarm's gonna ring and you're gonna wake up. Because you're not gonna say, who knows, when I close my eyes, what's gonna happen, right? So you have faith you're gonna get up. Even simple things, right? You have faith the toilet's gonna flush when you It's someone who says I don't have faith is lying, because you have faith. Everybody has faith. Just that a lot of times your faith is misplaced and you don't know where to put your faith. So you have faith. So in anything that you learn starts with faith. Otherwise you cannot learn anything. Right? As a teacher, you know that the kids have implicit faith that if you're showing them something, that's the right thing. And that's how you learn anything, right? You don't argue that, why is this A, why not this be A? When you start arguing that way, you cannot learn anything, right? So you accept on faith that, yes, this is A and this is B, and over time, you learn how to read words and the sentences, and then things make sense. And then your faith that you put in your teacher when you're in kindergarten is paying off, because what she told you or he told you is paying off, that it's making sense. So over time, you learn that. Next is, you have faith, then you have a process that's defined, okay, chant the holy name. And that process is, you have to be sincere. The next quality that we have to acquire is sincerity. That for anything that we need to, as you were saying, in your job, or you want to master a musical instrument, right? Somebody's got to teach you the technique. And you have to have faith that the person who's teaching you is teaching you the proper technique. And then you got to have sincerity to practice. Right? So you cannot just say, well, I tried it a couple times and I'm not able to play the violin like so-and-so, or I'm not able to play the piano like the major pianist or whatever, concert pianist, so there's no point. No, it's going to take time. So you have to have the sincerity to practice. I mean, the first thing anybody tells you for anything, right? Whether it's, some things are, you got to have some talent, like for art and for music and stuff like that. So you can't make somebody into a concert musician if they don't have inherent talent. But that's that apart. What I'm saying is, if you start a process, you have to have sincerity to practice it. Right? That's the second quality. Third quality is, can anybody guess? I've given you two qualities. And don't feel bad if you can't guess it. I'll tell you the answer. Determination. Third quality is determination. Because, if you have a practice, if you have faith and you're sincerely following something, the results may not come on day 1, may not come on day 10, may not come on day 50 even. It might not come at all for a while. But you have to have the determination to continue in your spiritual practice. And the fourth quality is actually what's going to tie it all together. Is enthusiasm. So if you have enthusiasm, then you can have determination. If you have determination, you can continue to be sincere. And if you're sincere, your faith will get stronger, and so on and so forth. So these are all qualities that feed each other, and that's what's going to drive us to a point where we get the benefit of chanting the holy name. So chanting the holy name is going to give us the necessary purification and the strength for advancement, and so on and so forth. And it's a lot easier than having to go to the forest. Krishna explains how the yoga practice of meditation is practiced. He says you go to the forest, you sit on a sitting place, and you put a certain kind of grass called kusha grass. You sit on it in a certain way, and you close your eyes half, and you concentrate on the tip of your nose, and so on and so forth. Why close your eyes half? Because if you leave it wide open, you're going to see everything, and you're not going to be able to focus on anything. And if you close it completely, you're going to fall asleep. So those kind of things. And plus, you got to sit there for not just for half hour, an hour. That's pretty much your practice, and that's days, months, years even. And it's not something which is practically, and possible. And other than that, chanting of the holy name is so much easier, right? Before we had some kirtan, and kirtan is nothing but chanting the holy name with the accompanying of musical instruments and singing and so on and so forth. So we chanting the holy name. If you're musically inclined, you can listen to music and at the same time glorify the Lord. And then there's japa. Japa is chanting silently or just with beads in hand. And so these techniques are much easier, because even with our busy lifestyles, we're able to incorporate these things in our life. If you're inclined to musical interests, you can hear music, but you can hear the glorification of the Lord, kirtan, and that's beneficial plus enjoyable. And if you're inclined to dance, then we have rocking kirtan, dancing kirtan. You can dance up and down, calisthenics or whatever else you like to do, and that's also incorporated. So practically speaking, this chanting of the holy name has Same benefits, but again, faith, sincerity, determination, and so on needs to happen. So you can't get to the mood that I've been chanting for 1 year and I haven't become one with God yet, or haven't seen God yet. Those are all somewhat childish. You can't even get a degree unless you practice 5 years or go to school for 5 years or 4 years or whatever. So you cannot become a doctor until you go through like 15, 20 years of school. I don't know what you guys go through. But so how can you see God or achieve your goal in spiritual life just in part-time 2 years or something like that? And so we got to examine ourselves sincerely and see how much sincerity, how much interest we have.
Probably, if my understanding is right, the goal is samadhi.
Right.
But that goal could be achieved by different processes. Is it right, bro?
Absolutely.
It could be through dhyana yoga, through like
right.
Other different types of yogas. And actually, I just had a comment about samadhi. Like samadhi, actual meaning. In fact, a lot of people don't even understand, and they think the samadhi is just sitting there and closing the eyes.
Right.
Like comes from samyak and adhi. Samyak means like equipoised, or equilibrium.
Right.
So and Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita again and again about who is equipoised, there are a lot of shlokas that probably the right who's equal in happiness and distress,
right.
who's equal in victory and defeat.
Right.
So the goal is to become like that, to become like equipoised in life. So I guess as you were saying earlier that bhakti yoga is a practical and relatively easier way to get to that stage of samadhi than in other different ways. Is that right, Paul?
Absolutely. And samadhi means ultimately. Samadhi really means, as you're saying, to be in your constitutional position. And constitutional position, it's like, Prabhupada's example again is that, you can take a fish out of water and put him in a golden cage and give him all sorts of wonderful foods to eat. But unless you put him back in the water, he's not going to be happy. He's going to struggle and die. So you cannot take the fish out of its natural environment, put him somewhere else, and then try to give him artificial happiness. I'm going to give you this and that, and I'm going to give you a nice female fish and you can be with her. Nothing is going to make you happy. So, back to the question that, if our goal of our life is to become happy, and the problem is we are taught in schools and in our families that you have the right to be happy. Your goal of life is to be happy. But nobody really tells us how. They give us all these pursuits that none of the people who went on these pursuits actually became happy. So their idea is that it didn't work for me, but it might work for you. So you try the same things, right?
Marriage are examples, bro.
Huh?
Marriage, parents have been fighting all the time, and then they're so anxious about getting the children married because they think that if the children are married, they'll be so happy.
Yeah, it didn't work for me, but it might work for you. So why don't you try it, right? I was hearing this. You know who Alfred Ford is? He's a great grandson of Henry Ford, and he's a disciple of Srila Prabhupada actually. Amrish Prabhu. He's a great grandson of Henry Ford. So he was giving a lecture in university in India recently, and I heard part of it, and I heard my spiritual teacher also talk about it a little bit. He was saying that he was giving a lecture to a graduating class of, I don't know, some university, I forget which. So he was telling them that, the things that you've been taught to aspire for, things like wealth, and fame and so many other influence and so many other things that you're asked to aspire for as part of your a successful career. You got to aspire for those things. I was born with those things, and I had more of it than I could even ever want to imagine. Because he's extremely wealthy. It's not like he's not just rich. There's difference between rich and there's well off, rich, and wealthy. Wealthy is different. Wealthy is we cannot even imagine what wealthy means. It's different level altogether. Like if you spend money every day as much as you can, you still will not even make a dent in your fortune. Basically, it's the kind of wealth he's talking about. And he said that the things that you aspire for, I was born with, and I've been to the end of that road, and there's nothing there. So I'm not telling you as somebody who it's like, okay, you know what? I'm not saying give up something which is not within grasp anyway. Right? So if someone says, okay, I mean, I give up I don't want to be the president. I'll give it up. But nobody's offering me that position. So I'm not in the running for being president. So me saying that I give up that position has no meaning. Because it's not within my grasp anyway. But if something is within my grasp, I realize that, and then I realize that it's not of any value, it's not going to give me happiness, and that statement makes sense. So he was telling them that you really aspire for values. Values are what is timeless. Principles are timeless. The application of the principle will depend on time, place, and circumstance. Right? But the principles and values are timeless, and that's where you have to understand what's going to make you happy. And if you don't understand what makes you happy, then you can pursue things all you want, but it's not going to really get you anywhere. And so, the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam talk about the specific process of Bhakti Yoga, which is devotional service to the Lord, which actually makes you happy. And when you're in the devotional service to the Lord, that platform of devotional service, that's platform of Samadhi. Because when you're already experiencing spiritual joy, then all the other qualities of a yogi in Samadhi automatically manifest. The one that Anil Prabhu was talking about in terms of being equal to happiness and distress, because it doesn't affect you anyway. Honor, dishonor, none of those things impact you anyway, because you're already experiencing so much spiritual joy that things that don't impact you at all. And we realize that in our practical life, we realize that, right? There's higher and lower happiness, we realize that. I mean, would you like to give you an example? Higher, lower happiness? So there's let's say what's the favorite thing you like to eat?
So many.
Right? Give me one thing.
Mango.
Okay, you like mangoes. So I have the best mangoes that you could possibly get, right? The best Alfonso mangoes that are succulent, tasty, beautiful, bright orange, yellow, nice flavor, and so on and so forth. I got a whole dozen of them on a plate. And I say, you know what? I have these beautiful mangoes for you. I brought it for you. And especially so you can enjoy these mangoes right now. So start eating the mangoes. By the way, I just got a phone call that you got fired from your job. But enjoy these mangoes. Do you not like mangoes anymore? You still like mangoes. Can you enjoy them?
No.
So, obviously, eating of a mango is physical pleasure. Right? The taste buds enjoy the mango. But the mental pleasure is gone. The mental peace is gone. So mental happiness is obviously a higher level happiness than physical happiness. Right? We have physical happiness, you have mental happiness, you have intellectual happiness. Right? So somebody who's highly intellectual, they might be watching a game of chess on TVs, two grandmasters playing, they might be appreciating each move. People who are not so inclined might be wondering what's going on TV. These guys are just sitting there staring at this board. And it's not like football or something that they're running. At least what is this guy doing? And so someone who's not at the plane of intellectual happiness cannot appreciate it. Or like very fine classical music. You require a little bit of understanding of classical music to appreciate it. And those who appreciate it, greatly appreciate it. Because I've been trained in classical music for a number of years, so I understand classical music, so I can appreciate it. Someone who's not been trained may just think, well, what are they doing? That's so boring. Right? So it's not like I'm more intelligent than others, but just that you've developed your intellectual faculty in one specific area, like modern art. It completely bewilders me. I have no idea what it is. Right? And I look at all these things and I say, what is this? Like if somebody draws a portrait or a scenery, I can at least appreciate it, but this, I just don't know what the guy's trying to do. Because my intelligence has not been trained in that area at all. So I cannot grasp the subtle points of the modern art that somebody's trying to depict. That's intellectual happiness. And so similarly, there's a spiritual happiness, which is vastly more satisfying than all these different smaller levels of happiness. And once you're at that level, you're automatically in Samadhi. Right, Dhamma Prabhu?
Approach him.
You have any comments on that?
Approach him.
So the yoga ladder, which is described in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, chapter 5, and so on, talks about the step-by-step process of yoga that you can achieve ultimately the highest goal. But the bhakti system can really take you to that path much easier, much faster, without having to stand on your head or any such thing. Right? So that is the process.
I have one more question.
Yes.
So we talked about four qualities: faith, sincerity, determination, and enthusiasm.
Right.
So these three, I can what is it? Faith, and I can have faith. I can be sincere, and I can be determined to do. But enthusiasm, how do we bring it up?
Okay, that's a very good question, actually. So, enthusiasm is what helps us have determination. Because otherwise it can get very dry. And the process of bhakti is described in the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam also. In Bhagavad Gita chapter 8 also it's described. It says susukam kartam abhyayam. Susukam means joyfully performed. So unless the process is joyfully performed, it becomes a
Dry.
very dry, boring, and tedious activity. If I say that you got to perform this activity for 40 years, highly tedious and really boring, and at the end of that you're going to get something, and then at some point you're going to start thinking that, okay, you know what, is that something even worth it? This is just too much. So the idea of enthusiasm will come only if you're experiencing some pleasure. The activity itself has to be pleasurable. Otherwise, how will you have enthusiasm? Right? So when you teach kids, I mean, Wendy teaches young children, so if she teaches them highly technical aspects she teaches art, highly technical aspects of art, pretty soon they're going to be bored. They're not going to focus on, technical aspects of art. They don't get it. But if you make it fun for them, then they're enthusiastic in the process of they might learn things they need to learn, but they need to have fun while doing it. If they don't have fun while doing it, it's not gonna, and that same thing applies to us as adults, right? We don't suddenly become different, the same. Be more restrained than kids, but basic makeup is not that different, right? If you don't enjoy it after a while, you're not gonna do it anymore. So the whole practice of bhakti is not just dry, philosophical, morose type activity where we have to all sit down quietly and then just be really morose. No, it's joyfully performed. We have desire to eat nice food, then we can have offer the best music, the best art, the best architecture, everything was related to Krishna, to God.
Even in Western culture, until recently.
Even so, until recently,
all
yes.
the music actually was meant for church, actually.
Right.
The appreciation of God and So I guess it's a very.
It's a very recent aberration, yeah.
Yeah.
That the whole idea of the I should feel happy first is the idea, but all this activity which is supposed to give us joy is dovetailed, is a word, to God, and then you can have enthusiasm, and you have to drive yourself to have that enthusiasm. Prabhupada used to say that if you're not feeling enthusiastic, then pretend to be enthusiastic, then enthusiasm will come. Right? Sometimes you got to push yourself that, okay, you know what, this process is the right process, just like exercising. A lot of people don't like to exercise, but then you realize it's beneficial, then you push yourself, and then you start enjoying it, and it becomes it's not like a pain anymore to go and work out. People like it. People who have gotten into that rhythm of working out enjoy it. If they don't work out, they feel something's missing. They want to go and work out. And somebody else might feel that it's just a waste of time, and he must be so morose that he's lifting this weight up and down for half hour. Just so much more fun to watch TV. But for that guy who's actually doing it, he's enthusiastic. He's enjoying it. He feels much better by doing that than by sitting on a couch eating potato chips and watching TV. So his enthusiasm levels are high. But a person who's not in that boat who's going to think, "No, it's much more fun to watch TV and eat chips." So the enthusiasm factor. He has to have faith that this process is going to work. Of it makes me feel better. Sincerity to do it, determination to do it, and above all enthusiastic. If you're not enthusiastic, determination will fall apart. And if there's no determination, then it's hard to be sincere. And if you're not sincere, then saying I have faith has no meaning.
That's what I've seen that, with my own experience, I've seen that if we lack enthusiasm, that also means that most likely we're not doing things right.
Right.
And I think if we are doing this for a while, let's say for a couple of months, couple of years, a couple of decades, and we are not enthusiastic about this process, it means that we should look back and see what are we doing wrong, because many times lack of enthusiasm means that we're not doing things right. We're doing it the wrong way, or we are just our faith is in a different direction. Our faith is not in the right direction. So.
Like Broji, in work also, like usually most of the people don't like to go and work, but they force themselves and try to enjoy. I think try to enjoy is the right word.
And enthusiasm has to come from inside for spiritual practice. See, somebody else from outside can inspire you once in a while, but it has to come from inside. You got to really be convinced, and you got to enthuse yourself.
Isn't that another part of doing your duty?
Yes.
That's a service.
Right.
So if you're thinking of that spiritually too, you're in devotion.
But you got to be convinced that it's actually beneficial. If you're just doing it just as because of the sense of service, at some point it's going to get to a point where, okay, it's a service. But you got to also believe that it's got to also really understand it's beneficial to you. But have the enthusiasm that our family has the enthusiasm. Because if we don't have enthusiasm, then we expect, hey, you should chant. Or be sincere. It didn't work for me, but it may work for you. Same thing, right? So I'm saying
I guess somebody who's more advanced than us. I don't know whether I'm wrong in this or not, but like-minded, I have a little bit of an objection to the term like-minded, because you like to associate with people who are just like you. The goal here is to associate with people who are more advanced than you, so that you can progress faster. Because if I like enthusiasm and you associate with me, I'm like-minded definitely, but you're not gonna have much benefit out of me.
That's one perspective.
As per our Shastra, as per Rupa Goswami, there are three types of association that are important for spiritual life. One is you have to associate with people who are more advanced than you, and you get inspiration from them, you learn from them. You serve them, get inspiration from them. The second type of association is people who are like-minded. So you can learn how to be non-envious and develop friendly relationships with them. Because typically when you meet somebody who's a lot more advanced than you typically don't become envious, because you automatically have reverence and you're not envious of people who are more advanced than you. Be any field. It doesn't have to just be spiritual, right? I mean, if you're a musician, aspiring musician, and you meet the topmost musician in that field, you're not envious of him. You're in awe of him. You're gonna say, "Wow, can I have your autograph?" or "Can you show me how I do this or that?" So you're in awe of him. You're not envious of him. If you meet him or another musician who's at the same level as you, the first feeling is envy, that I'm better than that guy. Why is he getting the opportunities? Why are people telling him, "Hey, you're a wonderful violinist"? They should be telling me. Envy comes in. So, for spiritual life, meeting people who are at the same level is also very important, because it teaches you how to develop friendly relationships, not have an envy, and so on and so forth. And then, important to associate with people who are looking up to you, so that you can then help them and preach them and have loving relationship with them. So all three relationships are equally important in Vaishnava life. So you cannot just associate with people who you're preaching to, and how people are looking up to you, because you have nobody to look up to them. And then that'll lead to envy and all sorts of other issues. And only associating people at the same level, like-minded, also is a problem, because then it'll lead to other issues. And only associating with people who are superior to you also is an issue, because then you don't know how to deal with people who are at your level and below you.
It's a very good point. Probably personally for me,
Yeah, it's not my point, it's Rupa Goswami's.
Yeah, because following all three types of association will make you more mature, I think.
Yeah, it's very important. All three are, for spiritual maturity, it's very important. Because only you have one type of association, then it becomes hard to deal with other types of association. And a lot of senior devotees end up having those kind of issues because they don't have that many people at their level or senior levels to meet with, and then it becomes an issue. So I did promise I would speak something about Lord Shiva, so we'll
Yes,
do
Prabhuji,
that.
we can.
We have some more time, right?
Yeah.
Maybe 10 more minutes. So this is in 4th canto of Bhagavatam. Daksha curses Lord Shiva. So Lord Shiva is is the foremost devotee of the Lord Krishna, of Lord Krishna. So he's the foremost devotee of the Lord. He's the foremost Vaishnava. Vaishnavanamita Shambhu. So Maitreya Muni, Vaidura is asking Maitreya Muni, the Lord Shiva, the spiritual master of the entire world, is free from enmity, is a peaceful personality, and always satisfied in himself. He is the greatest among the demigods. How is it possible that Daksha was his father-in-law, could be inimical towards such an auspicious personality? So you heard the story of Daksha being angry at Shiva. So Vidura is asking, how can Daksha be angry at such a personality who is the spiritual master of the entire world? So if you notice, Bhagavatam very clearly describes Shiva as the spiritual master of the entire world. So it's a very exalted personality. Is free from enmity. Is a peaceful personality and always satisfied in himself. Self-satisfied. So then Maitreya Muni starts speaking about what actually happened. He said in the former time, the leaders of the universe performed a great sacrifice, in which all the great sages, philosophers, demigods, and fire gods assembled with their followers. And Daksha was the leader of the Prajapatis, so the progenitors, the father of mankind, and he entered the assembly. His bodily luster was bright as the effulgence of the sun, and the entire assembly was illuminated. And all the assembled personalities became insignificant in his presence. And Daksha was the father-in-law of Shiva, because Daksha's daughter Sati was married to Shiva. And Daksha is the son of Brahma. It's the creator of the universe. So when he came in, everybody stood up to offer respects, and that's a sign of respect. When I was growing up in India, and most of you can probably relate to it, when the teacher walked into the class, all the kids would stand up. I don't know if it happens now in classrooms anymore. Did it happen when you were younger? In school? When you were in school, did it happen?
No, never.
But that was the custom in India. Like, when the teacher walks into the class, all the kids stand up and say good morning or good afternoon or whatever. That's the.
Throughout my schooling, it was the case. Yeah.
It's standard custom that you offer respects, and as soon as the teacher walks in, all the kids pretty much stand up. Nobody just sits down. So the teacher says sit down, and then you sit down, just like in a court, right? In a court of law, when the judge comes in, everybody stands up, right? And I've been to traffic court once or twice, and that's what happens, right?
Yeah.
That the judge comes in and everybody stands up. The same thing happens. So it's pretty standard practice of showing respect. And again, degradation of society over time is that if you can't show respect to the teachers, then you can't learn. Because you have to accept the subordinate position to the teacher to learn. And so if you cannot accept the subordinate position, it's like, water flows from higher ground to lower ground, knowledge flows from a higher place to a lower place. So if you cannot accept the subordinate position, you cannot learn. If I walk into a setting saying that, okay, well, I'm going to try to learn something, but actually I'm going to try to teach this guy what I know first, never going to learn, right? So the idea is to show respect, and everybody stood up, except two people. Two people didn't stand up. So Brahma didn't stand up. So with the exception of Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva, everyone gave up their sitting place and stood in respect for Daksha. The problem with my speaking Bhagavatam is that I'm never able to get through a whole pastime in less than 4 or 5 hours. Because I get to 2 or 3 verses, I start explaining the cultural context and what the mood of the people was, and that's how you have to hear Bhagavatam. It's not just the story. The story is you can speak the story in 15 minutes, but you don't get the context, then it's just something that totally escapes you. So we'll see whatever we can do. So Daksha was welcomed adequately by the president of the great assembly, Lord Brahma, and so he offered Brahma respects because Brahma was his father. And then Brahma, and then he took a seat. But he was very offended. It's like the Shiva didn't stand up and didn't show me any respect. He became very angry. And he became very angry because he was envious. Shiva is the spiritual master of the entire world. So in that capacity, he is superior to Daksha. But in Daksha's eyes, Daksha is like, he's my son-in-law. So he's like my son. So he has to offer me respects. And that was the expectation that Daksha had. But because Lord Shiva, being the son-in-law of Daksha, was expected to show his father-in-law respect by standing up with others. But because Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma are the principal demigods, their position is greater than Daksha. Daksha, however, could not tolerate this, and he took it as an insult by son-in-law. Previously, he was not very satisfied with Shiva, because Shiva was very renounced. He had no material possessions. You see the picture also, he's dressed in like bark and deer skin and tiger skin, and he lives in a crematorium. He doesn't have any possessions, and he's like extremely renounced. So Daksha was not thinking that this is the ideal son-in-law for my daughter. He's not having millions of dollars and a huge house and stuff like that. He's a pauper. So then he became very angry, and then he started speaking. He said, Shiva has spoiled the name and fame of the governors of the universe and polluted the path of gentle manners. Because he's shameless, he doesn't know how to act. So he starts blaspheming Shiva, saying, although he has accepted himself as my subordinate by marrying my daughter, and he's pretending to be like an honest man, he's not qualified to be my son-in-law.
Quick question from you.
Yes.
You know, in some of the previous, when you were explaining all the Ast Yoga, you mentioned that the prerequisite is celibacy.
Mm-hmm.
But when why it's such a big deal? One, and then, the gods are also married. Krishna has,
1608 wives.
Yeah, exactly. So why is such a big deal that celibacy is so important when the gods themselves?
Okay, so we'll address that question in a second. Let me continue with the story, because it's not directly related to the story, it's related to previous points. So let me finish this, and we'll have a Q&A. Okay? So he's saying, I have no desire to give my daughter to this person who's broken all rules of civility. But I was obliged to hand over my daughter just because Brahma told me. So he starts criticizing Brahma also now. That because of Brahma and my father, I handed my daughter in marriage to this person, Shiva. So he's completely lost it now. So not only is he disrespecting Shiva, he's also disrespecting Brahma, saying that, I don't know what happened to this Brahma. He told me, and I like a fool listened to him, and I gave my daughter in marriage to Shiva. But he's completely unqualified. Which then leads to a huge, he insults him, goes on insulting him, and I'll kind of wrap it up real quickly. And so he started cursing him, started saying that, because you're so unqualified, you will not get a share of the sacrifice. And moreover, all the people who are becoming your devotees will also not really get any benefit. So in spite of that, and then Daksha just walked out of the assembly in great anger. He was very angry. So when Shiva was cursed like this, Shiva's principal associates, Nandi, he became very angry. And he started counter-cursing the people who cursed Shiva. He says, anybody who accepts Daksha as the most important person and neglects Lord Shiva because of envy is less intelligent and will be bereft of transcendental knowledge. So anybody who thinks Daksha is right will be completely bereft of transcendental knowledge. And Shiva, he hears all this counter-cursing. Finally, he's very non-envious. He just completely walks away from there, saying, okay. And the whole pastime of how Sati wants to go back to another ceremony that Daksha has, and then Shiva says, don't go, and because he's not going to receive you well. but she wants to go, so she goes, and Daksha completely ignores her because she's the wife of Shiva, and so she gives up her body in complete disappointment. That's when Shiva gets very angry. Then he comes in and he completely destroys the sacrifice that they were conducting. This whole pastime. In the end, Daksha realizes what he did, and he comes back and he offers prayers to Shiva. And one of the prayers I wanted to read. So, how they pacify Lord Shiva. So basically, I'm not able to find that specific verse, but what Daksha tells Shiva is that you're the highest of the demigods, and your qualities are so exalted that there is nothing I can say or do to you to pacify you. Your qualities are so exalted that you have to be satisfied by your own good qualities. And that's how he praises him, saying that your qualities are so exalted that there's nothing I can say or do to pacify you. So you be satisfied by your own good qualities and excuse me. And so very quickly we talked about some Shiva's pastimes, but Lord Shiva is one of the principal demigods, and he's actually a great devotee of the Lord, and is in charge of the mode of ignorance, and is in charge of the destruction, and so on and so forth. So on these days of Shivratri and other types of auspicious days that we have to understand that what we pray to Lord Shiva for. So we cannot pray to Lord Shiva for material benefit. We pray to him for giving us the renunciation that he has, that we can then focus on the real goal of life. So again, that's really the purport of these kind of pastimes of the Lord, of Shivratri and so on. The other beautiful pastimes of Shivratri, of Lord Shiva on Mohini, that's also a wonderful pastime, how Shiva shows how powerful the energy of Krishna is. Where the whole pastime is a long pastime, but in that pastime he shows that nobody is about the illusionary power of the Lord, and how he came under the illusion of the Lord. And when Lord came as Mohini, he was completely enchanted and ran behind her to enjoy her, and he knew that pastime would be in the Bhagavatam, and everybody would look at it and say this is what Shiva did. But his idea is that if that glorifies Krishna, then that's what I need to do.
He's also one of the 12 Mahajanas.
12 Mahajans, yeah, absolutely. Mahajans are the great personalities. And so you have 12 great personalities. You have Yamaraj is there. You have Vidura, you have Prahlad Maharaj, Bhishma.
Not Vidura. Vidura is not
No, he's not. So he's speaking about the 12 Mahajans, right? So
Chatush Kumar, 4 Kumaras.
4 Kumaras.
Then Narad.
Narada,
Bhishma,
Bhishma, Vyasa, Brahma, Yamaraj, Lord Shiva, and Sukadeva Goswami.
And Vyasdev.
Vyasdev. So the question was on celibacy. Why is celibacy a big deal? So celibacy is again, this is a topic that I'm not fully qualified to speak on this topic, but I'll just answer your question specifically. That in the Shastras, what is described as Varnashrama. Varnashrama is the 4 Varnas and the 4 Ashramas is the basis of our Vedic civilization. Of any civilized human civilization, the basis of civilization is the 4 Varnas and the 4 Ashramas. The 4 Varnas are, you have the Brahmanas, the intellectual class. You have Kshatriyas, who are the administrators and protectors of society. You have the Vaishyas, who are the economics and business and so on and so forth, agriculture. And then you have the Shudras, who are the working class. And every society, whether it's formally or informally, functions that way. And then you have the 4 ashramas. You have the brahmacharis, who are students, whose whole occupation is to acquire knowledge Then you have the grahastas, who are householders. Then you have the vanaprasthas, who are retired and tending towards focusing on spiritual life. Then you have the sannyasis, who are renounced and fully focused on spiritual life. The progression is from brahmacharya to grahastha to vanaprastha to sannyas. And there is a system of going from brahmachari directly to sannyas. People who want to skip the grahastha and the vanaprastha life are allowed to go straight from brahmacharya to sannyas. And so it's like, the process is that if you're already attached to family life, then you go in student life, then you become a householder, and then in vanaprastha life you slowly give up your attachments, and primarily you give up sex life and other things. You may still live with your family, but you're detached. And then in sannyasa life, you're completely renounced, right? So those who don't want to go to the steps of being detached as brahmachari, then being attached, and then again trying to give it up and then become renounced, can go from being detached directly to be sannyas. So as per the civilized society, there is no permission for sex life and brahmachari life. As student life, there's no permission for that. You're focused on education, studying, and typically, that's the focus. And in vanaprastha life, you again not focused on family entanglements and sex life and so on. So that's also not permissible. And in sannyas, obviously, there's no question. So the only ashrama where sex life is permitted is grahastha life. And per Shastra, the purpose of sex life is to have progeny and beget Krishna conscious children and so on and so forth. That is what the Shastra says. So there is permission, and Krishna says in the Gita also that I am sex life which is not contrary to religious principles. So the Prabhupada interpreted as in our Kali Yuga that if we are engaging in sex life, but it's not contrary to religious principles. He said that my grahastas, my family, household devotees are also brahmacharis. So there are multiple steps. So first of all, that's one. And secondly, the sex attraction is the single most reason for attachment in the world. And the idea of practicing yoga system is to be detached and control your mind. And if you're not free from that, then it's impossible to control your mind. So it is not something which is artificially put in there. If you analyze, it becomes required. So why in this day and age the student population is getting degraded? Because they're engaging in sex life before they're mentally and physically ready. Maturity is not there, and all sorts of nonsense and problems come, right? So without any kind of regulation in life, it's not gonna be suitable. So that is a reason. Now the second question was why. So we cannot compare with people who are in a different situation, in different time, different circumstance. That's one, right? Because I'm not talking about demigods here. I'm just talking about even regular human beings. We have to figure out what we need to do and what our medicine. If you go to a doctor, right? Like Anil Prabhu's doctor in the hospital, right? And you may be sitting in a bed next to another patient, right? And that patient might be getting 2 pills. And Anil comes to you with an injection, gives you a shot. You cannot say, why are you not giving him a shot? Why are you giving me a shot? You should give him a shot. It's not fair. It's not a question of fair. What do you need? What is your affliction? So the medicine you get will be based on what your affliction is. It cannot be based on why that person is not getting an injection. I mean, I don't like to get a shot, so give him a shot. Or why are you releasing him from the hospital? And why are you taking me to the operation theater? You release me and take him to the operation theater. Those kind of statements we don't make because we realize that the treatment that's given is based on what our affliction is. But when it comes to spiritual practice, we look at other people and saying, well, that person is not following that, then why should I follow? That really has no meaning, because what is our affliction? And if you examine the reflection, then the answer is very obvious. If you want to take another man's medicine, then that might kill you. It's not going to help. It's medicine, so you cannot say, well, all medicine is beneficial. And that's the mindset people typically have, that, well, all medicine, all spiritual practices are the same, so I can do anything and I can do however I want. But that's not our attitude to medicine, right? We don't say, well, all medicine is medicine, the pharmacy is all medicine. I can take any medicine I want, in any quantity I want, and however I want, and I should feel better, because it's medicine. So, general principle is that medicine is good for human beings, right? But that's not our understanding. We just don't go to the pharmacy and say, I'm feeling sick, give me some medicine. Which medicine? What if? Doesn't matter, just pick something and give me so I can feel better. That's not our mood. And we cannot say, hey, that person is only getting 2 shots, I'm getting 3 shots, or you're taking me and giving me anesthesia and cutting out my organ, or cutting out my gallbladder, but you're not doing that to him. Those things have no meaning. So similarly, we cannot look at other people's spiritual practice and start comparing and saying, well, that person is doing this, that person is doing that. That's a second level. The third level is the Supreme Lord, Krishna. His definition is abhigya and swarat.
Okay.
Abhigya and swarat. Abhigya means fully cognizant, and swarat means fully independent. So we cannot question why. Because we are neither independent nor fully cognizant. So one of my senior godbrothers, going through, he had said one time that, and this is again just anecdotal, this is not a philosophical answer. He had said that if you're reading Bhagavatam, 10th canto, and you start off questions that why did Krishna do this, why did Krishna do that, then the answer to those questions is go back and read 1st canto. Because there's no other answer for those questions. The answer is go back and read 1st canto. The first verse, Janmadhyasya means, definition of God is Janmadhyasya means one before whom nothing existed. He's the source of everything. He's the source of everything. And then the same verse says Abhigya and Swarat, defines God. Abhigya means fully cognizant, and Swarat means fully independent, means not answerable. So, if we with our tiny brains have to comprehend why God did this and God did that, or why this is this way, it's not going to work.
We can't even comprehend how big the solar system is.
Yeah, we cannot even comprehend that. I mean, when I was a kid, we learned Pluto was a planet. Now my daughter, they taught that Pluto is no longer a planet, right? I was taught there were 9 planets in the solar system. I mean, most of us were taught that, right? Now they don't teach that anymore. There are 8 planets now. Did you know that? And by the time we're old and our kids become parents, there'll be 6 planets. I don't know. So how can it be absolute truth if it keeps changing? Right? I'll tell you another story also. This is also anecdotal, so it's not... But the problem is we're trying to comprehend something that's so enormous that only anecdotal examples can help us comprehend it somewhat. But there was this... so in Vrindavan, there was this cowherd girl, Gwalan, who would milk the cows and sell milk. And she would sell milk in these containers called lotas. It's called lotas in Brijbasi language. These earthen pots. That she would ask how many lotas of milk do you want? You could say I want 3, and then she'd give you 3, and then there's a charge per lotus, like whatever, 1 rupee per whatever the cost is. And then she wanted to get some clothes. So she went to the city. She wanted to get a sari. So then she asked the shopkeeper, so how many lotas of sari are you going to give me? And the shopkeeper's like, we measure with this measuring stick and not with lotus. And she was like, how is that possible? Everything is measured with the lota. In my world. How can you measure something else with something else? So we each have a lota in our head. And we want to measure everything that we see with the parameter that we have. And if it's not fitting in that, we think it's something wrong. It's not correct. Right? And that's a problem. Because our ability to perceive the world is limited by our our limitations. And then we impose our limitations on something that's unlimited and say, well, it's not fitting in my perception. It doesn't seem to be right. And then, how can somebody explain that to us? How do you expect to comprehend that? How do you expect to comprehend the unlimited with our limited faculties? We can only appreciate, we cannot comprehend. So the understanding is, Prabhupada was saying one time, right, that Krishna cannot be understood. God cannot be understood. Our aspiration can only be to love God and have the relationship with God, not understand Him.
And our religions say that, bro. Like Islam says that, Christianity says that. Don't even try to understand God.
Just love God, appreciate God, right? And that was so when devotee asked Prabhupada, then why have you written so many books explaining about Krishna and so on and so forth? He says, I wrote these books so that you can read them and understand that Krishna cannot be understood. Just appreciate.
And it is true, Prabhu, yes.
So the more you learn,
read,
you realize that, okay, this is completely beyond me. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's a whole description of Anantadev, Baladev, in his form of Anantashesh, says that he has unlimited mouths. And his unlimited mouths, he's been chanting the glories of the Lord for time immemorial, from beginning of time, and still not done. So in our short lifespan, 80 years or whatever, out of which first 30 years we don't even know what's going on. 20 years we don't know where we are. Right? And you take care of geriatrics, right? So you know.
You may not care nursing home.
Yeah.
One of the nursing homes will be sitting there not able to walk, not able to breathe,
If somebody asks us our name, we'll have to think for a few minutes saying, what's my name really? I forgot. So we have 30, 40 good years, out of which we spend working and doing so many things. So really, how much time we spend in spiritual pursuits? And in that short period of time, we want to understand things which are way beyond our capacity to understand. So why not just simply utilize the time to appreciate? And,
this celibacy, in fact, is not a right translation of brahmacharya. In fact, celibacy
Correct.
is just an aspect of brahmacharya.
right, exactly.
Thing is, everybody is supposed to be brahmachari. Brahmachari, like a brahmena charati, somebody who is trying to, achieve something higher, Brahman, So there are many processes, and all of us, in fact, are following brahmacharya in a way. Some of us may or may not practice celibacy, but again, that is a struggle. But anybody who is a true brahmachari automatically becomes celibate, It's just a process, it takes time, an evolution basically, it's sort of a spiritual evolution. Celibacy isn't, it's just a part of a brahmacharya. It is not it's a small area of brahmacharya. Brahmacharya is like a whole comprehensive concept. And, so grihastha in fact is also a brahmacharya.
Right.
Prabhuji was saying that, in fact, grihasthas, in fact, there was this debate going on in, Yudhishthir's, Rajasuya Yagya, and Shishupal was blaspheming Lord Krishna and calling him names, and a lot of things. And Bhishma was also sitting there. And one of the things Shishupal said was that he's a womanizer. And Bhishma immediately raised his hand. Everybody knows Bhishma is a Mahajana, and he never had sex in his life. So he said that how dare you speak like that, And I can say that I have been a brahmachari lifelong, and I can say that if I was in Krishna's situation, I could have never been a brahmachari like Krishna. And everybody said yes, because of course everybody. Krishna was was the president of the assembly, and everybody was praising him. Shishpal was the only one who was trying to blaspheme him. So so imagine Bhishma, who is a Mahajana and who has been lifelong, he never had sex. Sex is just not the one thing, and it's just brahmachari is a concept which I guess one can understand only after one practices bhakti yoga. Otherwise, brahmachari is a concept which no one has ever understood. And Srila Prabhupada used to the second example was just the Kupa Manduk Nyaya,
Right.
trying to understand, because Nyaya is one of the branches of Vedic knowledge. Nyaya, Nyaya basically means logic. So from Kupa Manduk Nyaya, we are basically frogs in the wells. That's how exactly we are. So try to understand Atlantic Ocean and Pacific Ocean by using the logic of a frog in the well. We can never understand that.
Yeah.
So brahmachari is a concept we can never
Can
understand.
you explain that analogy for people who might not know it?
You cook manduk?
Yeah, please.
It's simple. It's like if a frog in the well, well, it's kind of a story. Like it's a small anecdotal story, and this story is basically, again, it's like parable in Bible. Like you tell stories to give a spiritual lesson.
Right.
So there was a frog in the well, and then one frog was visiting from outside. Like he used to live in a lake. So that frog came in, and this frog in the well said, "Oh, welcome! Like, how big is your place? Like, So he said, like, I live in a lake. So how big is the lake? Like, is it like twice as big as my well, or 3 times as big? And that's how he was like. So that's the kind of example, like in the short. That
And finally, he said that you must be lying because nothing can be so big.
Yeah, when even lake is so big, like, and I'm talking about ocean here. Like, so again, that's the kind of logic here that how could we understand unlimited in our limited perception? Like, we can't even understand our immediate surroundings. Like, if I ask you how many houses do you have in your development, you won't be able to tell me that. What to talk about being how many houses you have in the Reading. You're talking about God, who is unlimited, and So again, brahmachari is the same thing. Brahmachari basically is a concept which one will never understand unless one becomes a devotee. That to a pure devotee, because this is a very unique concept which is typical of bhakti yoga, which nobody has ever understood. People can make interpretations and they can make a mistranslation. Celibacy is a mistranslation of brahmachari, because celibacy is just one aspect of it, like abstinence, basically what the people like say celibacy, abstinence. But brahmachari is it's a very unique concept, in spiritual life.
It's like being vegetarian is only one of the minor aspects of
Right.
being a devotee, because Prabhupada would say that even the goats are vegetarian, but they're not spiritually advanced. So it's not like you take spiritual instruction from a goat. A goat is a goat, and so but is it required to be following a violence-free diet or a minimized violence diet? Yeah, it's important. People might ask that, okay, so even plants have life and you're killing plants. True. So we cannot zero violence, but minimize it. And nobody in the right mind can claim that plucking an apple from a tree is the same as whacking the head of a goat, right? It's the same. It's obviously a lot more violent, even for from a visual perspective, it's a lot more violent. So so there is violence involved in even in eating plants, but the idea is you minimize it as best as you can. And this is how you minimize it. Because even if you eat plants, you think living entities are not being killed? Absolutely. When they plow the field, so many little living entities are killed, like insects and worms are crushed by the plow. All these things happen. So you still are engaged. Some violence involved, some karma involved, but the idea is it's wrong logic to say that since there's violence involved, let's maximize it. Right? The idea is, okay, let's minimize it. How can I minimize it? Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Good question. It brought up a lot of good points.
So we'll stop here. You can.
Jaya Uma Pati Shankar Bhare
अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की नमचाल हरदास ठाकुर की प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवास आदि गौर भक्त वृंद की मेरे नाम संकीर्तन की हरे कृष्ण महामंत्र की गौर प्रेमानंद all glories to the bodies, all glories to the bodies, all glories to the feet of Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga Yeshwar Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you.